hi guys.
Hi, Mike.
That was a pretty cool clip. Yeah, that's a clip from The Chosen, season 3, episode 8, Peter walking on the water. And it's really powerful. They combine a few different verses there, but it really is quite a powerful scene. And I want to talk about it for a minute because there couldn't be a better biblical example of going through a storm than Peter literally going through a storm. And really just that whole process of him stepping out of the boat. And I want to hear from you guys for a moment. What do you think was like the goal of that exercise? I think we can be pretty sure that that storm wasn't a coincidence, right? You have a scene where you have all the apostles getting in a boat, traveling to the other side, and it happens to be an occasion when Jesus is not in the boat with them, and then they end up encountering this like life-threatening storm. Like, you guys talk to me about that. What do you think was going on? I mean, obviously we know it wasn't a coincidence. This is something that I think we're pretty safe to assume Jesus was doing to do a work in their process, right? Barry, you want to pass the mic, Joe?
You know, right before this scene, he talked about how much faith he had, and then it's like the Lord brought him to the point to make him ask to come walk out in the water. Like, if he said, if you command the water to hold me, I have the faith and I will do it. And to me, that was really, really powerful, like, imagery. And then the other thing that I think too is that there was this other backstory when he lost a child, and that was really an important development, and it made him angry at the Lord. And so the Lord had a lot to work out with Peter. I love the
So
scene.
you can say the storm, obviously some of that's in between the lines of scripture, you know, what was happening with his wife and stuff like that. But you could say the way they portrayed it, particularly in The Chosen, was the storm brought out something that needed to be brought. Like, it brought it to a head. Something that needed to come to that crossroad and be exposed, it exposed it.
Exactly.
Good. How about someone else? Dana, can you pass that over?
I just saw it as more like that God, he was trying to teach that, you know, life isn't always, just because it may look like there's a storm out there doesn't mean that it's not something that's good, or it's not something that's coming from God to strengthen us. And that, you know, it's oftentimes in the storms that we grow in our faith. And to step out in that, can you step out in that even with the waves on either side of you, with everything going on? Can you still just keep your eyes focused on me and realize that if you do, it doesn't matter what's on the left or right of you. It doesn't matter what you're standing on. It just matters if you just have faith in me and you focus on me and not on your problems, that I am there and I am faithful to always save you. And but it's almost like he was trying to teach Peter that, you know, I'm not doing these things to punish you. I'm not doing the things that are happening in your life right now to make you weak. I'm doing it to make you strong, and that there's purpose to my going through that storm. But then I'm always in that storm with you. You guys are out here. I'm here with you. So.
Right. Good. Anyone else? Sylvia, then Dayton. You gotta turn it on.
I saw several things. I thought the whole thing was really powerful, and I felt like there was a point. It's it was talking about how God wanted to test the disciples' faith to see, what where they're going, if they were going to freak out, which they did. But then when they saw it was him, they took, courage. And then, and the fact that he put Peter out there and had him walk in faith. I actually felt like it brought healing into his life, even through. I like the part that they were doing both her and him, and even though he experienced that loss, God was saying to him that I have you in this storm, and I'm gonna heal you from what you've gone through and stuff like that. So I felt like there was a healing in process for Peter and his wife, and I just thought that was really powerful, and the whole thing was really intense.
That's good. Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Dayton?
It was, I think it's a cool like experience of like how we always say like, oh, like I'm gonna be this when the time comes, but we always say like you don't know until you're in that moment, like where you're gonna fall, like when like the fight or flight response kicks in, like you can always hope that you have like enough practice that like
Yeah.
you'll fall in the right spot.
You're all talk until you go through it.
Exactly, and I
Yeah.
think like even though they spent all this time with Jesus, like it's really easy to be like, well, we're these God men, but like when your world collapses in front of you, like where are you gonna land? And I think it's like a cool experience, to, like kind of like in one moment, like obviously like they were really scared for their lives and like all these things were going through their minds. Like I'm sure it's really easy to start thinking about the natural in that moment.
Yeah.
And but I also thought it was cool, like kind of like what like my dad said, that just keep your eyes on me. And like I think it was kind of cool, like Peter kind of was the advocate for all the disciples as a whole of like this experience, because obviously they were there and they saw it, and
Yeah.
he kind of represented them in that moment. But just that it was kind of like a dad moment, because it was like he stepped out and obviously like he didn't have like the sustained faith and he fell, but then like when he was putting him back in the boat, like he kind of like when like a father like disciplines and then explains like whether it's like a spank, like like this is why I had to spank you, and like helping the son understand.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like understand that like if you have faith in me and you keep your eyes on me, I promise you I have these plans for you.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that moment of like comfort, and then like he was holding him in the boat and stuff like that. But it
Yeah, I
was,
like that moment where all of a sudden he's standing there and Jesus has his arms around him. He's saying, "Don't let me go."
Yeah.
And just don't let. And almost that like trauma, like the way of just like, "Don't let me go, don't let me go, don't." And obviously, it was more than the way they portrayed it in the movie. Was not just about the fact that he almost drowned in the water, but his deeper circumstances that were going on. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I want to talk about this scene because there's something that is really counterintuitive about our relationship with God that I want to establish before we go forward. And we have this mindset that we think, I need to have all my storms go away so I can be at rest. I mean, tell me you don't think that way constantly. Whatever that thing is for you, that's your irritant or your struggle, your thorn in your side, your circumstance, that if only this would go away, then I could be at rest. And I really liked that they included that scripture. It's not where it's included in the Bible, but I'm going to read it. So Matthew 11:28 through 30, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's really interesting writing for The Chosen, don't you think? That you have this scene of Peter stepping out of the boat, walking on the water, and they're using this scripture. Obviously, that's not the time and place that it was said, but isn't that a perfect place to put it? And that's what I want to focus on even more. A lot of you talked about faith, and it definitely applies, but I also want to highlight rest. Like really entering into a place of rest, even peace. And like we just said, we have this idea in our head that as long as the storm dies down, then I can find rest. But what I want to establish, and I want to talk about it a little bit before we go forward, is it safe to say that you actually need the storm to find rest? That sounds really counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because when you're in the midst of it and you're struggling and everything's pulling on you, the obvious answer seems, take this out of my life and I will be at rest. But are you? Like, what's your experience? When you have whatever that thing is that you think is your stress, your issue, your struggle, when it's not in your life, did you step into a life of rest? Or did you find something else to stress about? I mean, I'd like to just hear a couple comments because it's a counterintuitive statement. I don't need my storm to go away to find rest. I actually need a storm so I can find rest. Dayton?
So I don't know if this is exactly in line with what you're sharing, but what you're sharing is like bringing a thought to my mind that there's a technique that people, when they say that people have a really hard time falling asleep, is because a lot of times they're holding a lot of tension in their body. And so there's a technique that people use called like a tension and relax exercise. And so a lot of people don't know that they're holding all this tension in their muscles. And so what they do is they tell you to start from the top of your head and like start like with like your neck and like flex the muscle as hard as you can for however long, and then let go. And then go to the next muscle and work basically from the top all the way down. And you find out that you don't know you're tensed until you flex it as hard as you can and you actually experience what it means to have a relaxed muscle.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can't experience the relaxation until you tense that muscle as hard as you possibly can and fatigue it. And so it's kind of cool because eventually you get to the point where your whole body is exhausted and you become to a point of rest.
Yeah.
And you're no longer holding tension because you can't. But until you go through like that whole process of like fatiguing your body, you actually, like what you're saying, like you experience rest. But if you take that away, you still, like you said, you'll find tension somewhere else. But like until you go through a storm, you can't really experience rest until you know what chaos is like in a way. But that was just what's going through my mind. Is like you need that storm in order to experience like what it means to be at peace.
Good. How about someone else?
I always look at it like stress and storms are really just something that's dormant inside of you, and all it needs is the perfect surroundings to bring it out.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, God uses different things in my life, like stress points, and he kind of gradually does it because that's what brings it to the surface, is just that right person or just that right situation so that it gets out, so that it can be exposed. Because otherwise, we can all be fine if we're around people that think like us, do anything, but bring one person in the room and all of a sudden chaos. But that doesn't mean that you're stress free. It just means that you're blind and you're deaf to what really is inside of you. But just the right kind of thing that comes along will set it off. And until you cure how you handle stress and how you handle circumstances, you can't really be at peace, because something is going to come. It's going to be there. And so I felt like God's been just testing me and bringing me through more difficult circumstances to show how do you handle that stress. In the midst of that stress, do you have mechanisms inside of you to say, I'm going to choose not to be that way? And doing that can only come through constant friction until that friction, you stretch that threshold. And now things might be chaotic around you, but you've found a way to kind of be at a place of peace. So, I don't know.
Good. How about, I want to go a little different direction when talking about this. What do storms bring out? What's the result most of the time for you when you're in the face of a storm? Something beyond what you can handle. Because essentially that is what we're talking about of a storm. There's my life is stressful, and then there's the storm. I hit that point where it stepped beyond what I'm used to managing, and now it's in the realm of, oh gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. What does that provoke inside of you when you're there?
It provokes fear in me.
Okay. What is someone else? What does that provoke inside of you? Okay, what does it cause you to do?
Take charge.
Do things in your own power.
Man, you guys are giving all the, yeah. It causes you to cry out to him, right?
For sure.
Yes, everything you're saying is true. Yes, it causes fear, it causes doubt, it causes all these things, but eventually it crosses this place where all of a sudden you do what Peter did.
Yeah.
You're drowning at that point. So all of a sudden you hit this place where you've decided my intellect's not enough. My own willpower, not enough. My own ability to overcome, not enough. And it puts you in this place where you cry out to him. I mean, that's what you guys do, isn't it? And the alternative is fill up with fear, fill up with some sort of self-empowering energy to help meet the need. Even something like depression or heaviness, they're all self-empowering energies to meet the need of whatever the thing is that we're dealing with. So we need the storm. And we need it because we've all developed ways to deal with stress. And they're self-empowering ways that we've used to just navigate through life that isn't dependent on Jesus. How many of you would say it actually requires a storm for you to get to that place where you're even in touch with how much you need him? How many times have you encountered in the last month where you were in that place like Peter, where you were reaching up your hand because you knew if it wasn't for Jesus pulling me up, I'm not getting pulled up? I'm betting if you've gotten there in the last month, it wasn't really a long stretch that you stayed there. Do you guys disagree with that? I mean, get to that place where you see things in their proper order, that he's God, and I am entirely dependent on him. What's the standard? What's the typical thing that we do? You reach out to him, and maybe you're in that time of need, that desperation, and what happens as soon as the tension starts to go down even a little bit? You take over. Am I right? You take over. So we need the storm to find rest, because it's our own self-empowering ways that prevents us from stepping into it. Mind you of a story of a very, very large group of people who were stuck in a desert? In Hebrews 4, it talks about how they didn't enter into his rest because of their disobedience. So we need these storms, and I thought that Chosen episode described it really well, because you could see Peter rising up with all this self-empowerment of, God, why aren't you doing this? Why isn't this happening? Why are you responding like this? And like, why is he allowing all this to happen? Why didn't Jesus just fix it all, heal it all, make it all go away? And I like at the end, because he said, Peter, you're going to go through a lot. He was trying to bring something to the surface, uproot all the different ways that he has learned to deal with stress, to deal with just his own self-empowering ways. I think it's safe to say we need storms in our life, because we need them to expose the self-empowering ways that we've developed to protect ourselves, to be vulnerable. Isn't that pretty simple? To just get to a place where you're vulnerable, where you can be face to face with a threat, and your natural, immediate reaction is vulnerability. Is that your immediate reaction when you face a threat? It's not. As much as we trust him, we believe in him, we recognize that he's sovereign, vulnerability is not the first place that we go to. If we're really honest with ourselves, it's the last place that we go to. We only step into vulnerability when we've just fully maxed out what we think we're capable of, and now are reaching up our hand when we're drowning. So we need storms. We need those things to put us in a vulnerable place so we can have our relationship with our God in the right order. So it's not just us being Christians who are navigating through our circumstances with Christian principles, but we're actually entering into his rest. We're entering into a place of fellowship and intimacy with him, not one where we're just in complete control, deciding every solution, everything that needs to happen, all the problems, figuring out all the answers, but you need something that's going to put you in a place of vulnerability. We need stress, actually, to make us strong. And I don't see anybody like sitting in their chair disagreeing with me right now. But how many of you are looking at your life that way? Whatever it is that you're going through right now, are you actually looking at things that way? Or you taking whatever your stress is and figuring out how to make it go away, thinking, I need the storm to go away so I can be at rest, rather than realizing I need the storm right now so I can be at rest. Because it's really counterintuitive. You understand it, but I mean, think about your day. Think about what you went through. Were you looking at whatever challenges that you had and embracing them in such a way of saying, I am so self-empowered that I actually need these challenges so I can find rest? Because without them, I'm just going to see things in terms of, I got it going on, I got it figured out. But it's like, no, I need this. I actually need it so I can rest. So I can be still inside. So he can break down all the soulish ways that I've learned to navigate through my circumstances. I want to share an example that is kind of funny, but I think it actually defines my journey with God a lot. Is I had an occasion where I went with some friends to a theme park a long time ago, and I never liked going on roller coasters. I was the kid who you'd go and you'd put me on the little like teacup ride, and I'd get sick and like go throw up in the corner. I didn't see myself as had this really high tolerance for rides, but it's like we were going and I was there, and I remember they were headed towards this ride, and I was waiting for come join us, and they were like, no, they were just gonna go do their thing, whether I came or not. So it was like, well, I'm gonna come, and I remember sitting on this roller coaster ride, and it was fun. It was like really fun. I also kind of learned I like roller coasters, but not things that spin. That hasn't changed. But it was really fun. But after I got off the ride, I realized something. I looked under my arm, and my whole arm was black and blue. I was like, well, that's not good. It was a fun ride, but I spent the whole ride holding the side of the roller coaster as tight as I possibly could, as if that was the thing keeping me in. There's a little bit of a safety thing, because you go and you have this probably 17-year-old who's running, this massive ride, and they're the one who's in charge, and the safety check is someone pushes a bar until it clicks at your stomach, and maybe you get the guy who, after it clicks in your stomach, they'll give it just a little tug to make sure it doesn't come loose, and then you're off for the ride. That's the roller coaster. And I realized that me holding on to the side of the roller coaster so tightly, it didn't save my life. It didn't. I'm not strong enough to hold myself in that seat to keep myself from getting flung out of this roller coaster. It was that seatbelt or that pad that they click in front of you, and in order to enjoy the ride, you got to be able to let go. And it hurt. My arm's all sore now, but I didn't accomplish anything. I think that's a really good image for the kind of soul power that we fill ourselves up with, and how highly resistant we are to being vulnerable. because everybody else had a lot of fun on that ride. And I think we can embrace our journey with God the same way, because he's bringing these storms that we've all agreed are necessary. We have to have the storm, and the point of the storm is to help you get to a place of rest. There's some times where they have animals that, whether they're sick or they're just going through their own stressful circumstances, they just have to tranquilize them, because it's the only way to get them to this point where they don't just so physically exhaust themselves, they'll just kill themselves. So they have to literally tranquilize them as a way to cause them to rest. We do that as society. Doctors give out all these sleeping pills and all these medications and drugs as a way to help people get to a place of rest. But it doesn't work. If we could just get there from lack of challenge, it would be easy. But we have to be purged. We have to get to this place where we're vulnerable, where you can just step onto the roller coaster and just let Jesus take you for the ride. A roller coaster is something that can be really stressful, if you're like me, when I got on the first time, or it could be something that's really fun. Kind of depends how much you let go, doesn't it? And I've had this moment where I kept having this image where I felt like Jesus was pulling up like all this stuff. And I could feel so much going on spiritually. But I was able to take a step back for a moment and just let him take me for the ride. What do you do when you feel something really, really bad spiritually? It's the first thing that you do. Inspect. Right. You engage your intellect, you figure it out, you try and sort through it, and then once you've decided what you think the problem is, then you try and come up with a lot of solutions of how do we fix this, how do we make this go away, how do we deal with this, rather than just going for the ride. Saying the Lord is purging something from me right now. He's bringing me through a storm because there's some spiritual influences that he wants to deal with inside of your heart that are preventing you from resting. And there is a way where you can embrace whatever you're going through and actually enjoy the ride. I mean, think about that. It really is just like a roller coaster. You can let go of all the tension, even in the face of some really, really challenging things. And I want to talk about a few things that are going to help us do that. All of this that we've talked about was just to establish the baseline. You need a storm. So stop thinking that you need it to go away so you can find rest, and realize that maybe if you look at the storm, you'll come to terms with it and realize that storm is there so you can get to a place of rest. Everything we talked about is just that. You guys with me? That's it. And it really has everything to do with being vulnerable. I think one of the most powerful things that happens, it happened again at Love Feast, part of what made me think about it, isn't the most incredible testimony that someone shares? Isn't it when they're vulnerable? Like, it's so powerful. You get to that place where there's a couple different testimonies, people sharing different things, and then you have that moment where someone raises their hand and they find the courage to share something that's really vulnerable. Just honest. Transparent. It's really moving, isn't it? And I think that's the biggest key, is if you can realize when you're going through your storm, can you quicken that period where you reach up your hand to Jesus and say, Lord, I need you, like in this video? Because I'm telling you, what most of us do is first we go to intellect, then we start sorting through it, we go to outcomes, and we'll exhaust every soulish way that we have to deal with it before we finally just make the reach. How many of you have a hard time being vulnerable, say, to whoever's counseling you? It's hard, isn't it? Because who knows? What are they going to say? Are they going to hurt you? Are they going to say something that's too hard for you to hear? And we all know that's the answer. Confession, vulnerability. But most of the time, it's the last thing we do. It's like the last resort. And then God has to push the envelope a little bit further to bring us to this place, because we just cannot find rest unless we're vulnerable. Because if we're not vulnerable, we're self-empowered, aren't we? We weren't made to sort through all of life's problems. We were made to just be obedient, to connect with Him. It's the biggest tool that we have, and it's one that we don't utilize that much. Real, true vulnerability. Can I just hear a couple comments about that before we move on? Barry, can you guys pass the mic over?
Yeah, recently I had a storm, and I really cried out. I really cried. I was crying. And I said, only you can take this away. Only you can. But I said those words, only you can take this away. And it's the first time that that's happened in a really long time. And since then, I feel like as if it's something's broken, because I felt like He showed up. And like I didn't think that He wouldn't show up, but He actually did show up, and I feel like there's something that's different now. I don't know for how long, but anyways, so.
Good. How about someone else? Anybody? You guys alive out there? Yeah. There's like a heaviness that's like kind of falling over everything that be good to just like fight to engaged. Like it can just, it's actually like a cloud just like taking over everything. But I'm talking about being vulnerable. Yeah, and I want you to try and think of a moment, maybe even when's a circumstance where you were struggling and you were having a hard time, and that's all it took. Just being vulnerable. I think most of the time that happens in the form of confession with another person, but that most definitely happens between you and God. But I think when you have a physical person standing in front of you, it makes vulnerability a little more real, even though obviously God is there, you know, right in front of you. But can you relate to that? You know, think of that moment where you're in the midst of whatever that storm is. And like Barry was sharing, where he was going through something and it finally brought him to that place where he reached out, you know, raised his hand and just said, Lord, you help me. And I just would like a comment somewhere in that arena, like, are you immediately going to that place? Or do you go to that place once you've exhausted all your own ways of dealing with things? Dana?
No, unfortunately, I usually use all my other tools in my bag before I do that.
It's like the last thing.
I don't generally go to asking for help, you know. And sometimes it surprises me. Things can be that bad, and it's just, no, I can try to still figure this out. And then I'll go, and then I'll finally do that and be vulnerable. And every single time I do, usually through counsel, sometimes by myself, but I mean, it's usually through counsel that, you know, just the right fresh wind will come in a word of just truth that breaks it. And sometimes I have to do that for it to be broken. Sometimes I can't do it on my own.
Yeah.
Because I'm just using the same old wind, and I need an outside observation to step in and then believe on that and kind of hold on to that new rope before it breaks. And so it's usually only in times of vulnerability, you know, if my people will, basically that whole verse is, if my people will be vulnerable and just say they screwed up and come to me, will I not take you back? And that's kind of what it is. We kind of just run around, and God the whole time is like, you can come to me about this. But for whatever reason, that's not my go-to. My go-to is always, no, this is too much for them. They don't need to hear this. Da, 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 da. I'll just deal with it. And then I sit in my muck. So.
Yeah. And what do you feel when you're vulnerable? Are you, dare I say, at rest?
Dare I say.
There sometimes can be that.
Yeah.
But usually
Yeah.
After what? Go ahead, Sylvia.
Sorry.
The mic.
No, what you were saying, what do you feel? And I said, sometimes I feel really anxious, but then after I talk about it, I feel that rest.
Right.
That I'm like,
Because
oh my
talking
gosh,
about it, you were doing what by talking about it?
you were letting it go. You were giving it to God.
You're being vulnerable.
Exposing it. Yeah, being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right. You're being vulnerable.
It's a tool that we need to grab a hold of, and sometimes there's occasions where I'm really struggling with this. I'm dealing with this struggle, and I mean, it's good that we take time to pray and try and press through and do it on our own. But at a certain point, like I've heard people say, "Oh well, I don't really talk to Phil and Colleen until Thursday, and it's Friday right now, so I guess I'll just get by for 6 more days." And it's not the way to do it. He's bringing these things up. I want to keep going backwards because I want it to stick. We're going through what we're going through because he's trying to break down all of these self-empowering ways that we use to work through life, to be vulnerable, to be led by him, to be a person who's in union with Christ, who just responds according to his spirit, to be somebody who just rides the roller coaster and enjoys the ride. Like, don't you want to be a person who just, whatever you're going through, whatever challenges and just things that are, it's like it's just, you're going for the ride. Like I've brought it up so much because I love the scripture with the story of Thomas, where he's in his gospel. There's that story where he's close to losing his life, and the guy he's with is freaking out, and he's just, well, let's just see what the Lord does. Don't you want to be that person? But we keep going through these circumstances thinking the storm's got to go away. It's got to go away because that's the only way that I find rest. I mean, that's what we want, isn't it? Don't you want to live in a perpetual state of rest? That's the goal. Who's in the way of that? Is it the circumstance? No, we're in the way of that. And the thing that I wanted to start with is vulnerability. Is like a quick exit. Because it's the goal. It's a quick way to get to that place where you can skip I don't need to go to 6 days. I don't need to talk about the weather and talk about all the wonderful things that are happening and put on a facade of how wonderful my life is and how perfect everything is and how spiritual my prayer time is being. I don't need to report all the answers that I've come to, all the conclusions that I've drawn, all the problems I've decided. They just need to cut the crap and be vulnerable. And we really don't like it. We really, really don't like being vulnerable, but we love it. I think it's the best feeling in the world. It's just not fun getting there. Dayton?
Yeah, vulnerability's not my MO. But I agree, like, once it's out, it's like there's the relief. There's like the finally, like, now you know what I'm going through, but it's me who held back, like letting somebody know what I was going through.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just like how I just decided to hold emotions as a kid or whatever, but it's just like it wasn't okay to not be okay, if that makes sense. That like it just, you had to be good because, you know, God forbid you're not good, you know, and then I gotta like tell you why I'm not good, and that just became like normal for me. Of just like, just let everybody know you're good, like you're good. And so denial and all these things became like my crutches to just not have to deal with what was going on or let people in on what I'm going through. And I'm very good at that. Like, well, like I don't talk to Phil until this time. So, you know, we're just going to figure out how to figure it out. And then by the time comes, like, well, I'm good. You know, I figured it out, you know. And instead of just like stopping what I'm doing and just saying, you know what, I need help with this.
Right.
And I just think that it became easier for me to just be in denial about everything than to have to face it.
To just be independent.
And just decide I know better, or I've figured it out this far, or whatever. But I mean, I'm like a car with one wheel, you know, I clearly don't have it going on, you know. You know, I'm broken, but, you know, why get fixed? You know, I've gone this far, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would like to be in a place where denial is, and I'm sorry, not denial, but like being vulnerable is the first step, or even just to say like, I'm not 100%, you know, like, so I need help, like, and just being okay with just asking for help and being out, whether it's, you know, with the Lord or in my personal prayer time or in a counseling appointment or whatever it might be. But
Yeah, how many, like another really common one that everybody does is you go to that place where you're really struggling, you're having a hard time, and it's like 10:30. And it's like, well, you know, it's too late. Like, certainly it's not the occasion to make that call, and then you come up with 100 different reasons why you shouldn't and why you're just being a burden and blah, 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 when really we're just avoiding. We're just keeping ourselves, and it's like, why is the answer to stay up all night tossing and turning in your bed because you're so disturbed by what you're dealing with than just calling? It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. I think that's why it's so powerful at Love Feast when somebody does it. Because it's foreign, actually, to just be vulnerable, to be unprotected in a way. But it's how we find rest. It's how we humble ourselves to be able to just freely share what's really going on inside of our heart. And the truth is even though we might be praying prayers and taking some action to be spiritual, if we can't be vulnerable with whoever that person is to you who's helping guide you spiritually, do you think you're being vulnerable with God? They relate, don't they? I mean, they're hand in hand. Because we do the same thing, and we may pray that prayer, God help me, you know, this is going on, but the follow-up right after that is, but maybe I should do this, and maybe I should do this, and sorting through all the conclusions and all the answers and doing all the stuff before we're just vulnerable. I like really, really want to be that person who just enjoys the roller coaster ride. Because that's what it is. There's ups, there's downs, there's hard moments, there's really fun moments. But we can go through the rest of our lives just totally at rest. But we got to realize I actually need the storms to get me there. And I can brace them in such a way that it almost becomes enjoyable, because you get to see how God is stirring inside of you. You get to have this really intimate connection with Him. It is just a really foreign thing. I kind of don't want to move on from it, but there's one other point I want to bring up before it gets too late. But just hold on to that. Just when you're in that place and you're having a hard time, maybe ask yourself, like, what's really stopping me from just being vulnerable right now? Like, why is it that just reaching out to God is like the last thing I do, despite your prayers that you might pray? Because we're not really being vulnerable if you're coming up with a bunch of conclusions in your mind, sorting through it. Where is this coming from? Trying to figure it all out on your own. But that broken, vulnerable, Lord, I need your help place. The second thing that I think is really helpful is actually just obedience. How many times have you ever been in a appointment before and maybe you were given counsel to go a certain direction and it just like went right over your head. Sometimes we spend so much time sorting through things because we're not vulnerable that we end up not being obedient. And I've had this image in my mind that has really, really been helpful. There was this author, I don't remember what book it was, but it was a Max Lucado book, and he talked about how our walk with God was like being on a sailboat. And it just like always stuck with me before, where sometimes you're just in the middle of the water, and when you're in a sailboat, you can't just go where you want to go. You kind of like need wind, you know. And so he had this image, and I always kind of equate like my journey to that a little bit. And I realized that obedience is like a rudder on that boat. That sometimes when you're going through a process of the Lord really purging things from you, just grabbing a hold of the one thing that he told you to do and doing it. And it happens over and over and over, where we'll go through our week and we're saying, Lord, I just really need your help. You know, where are you? I can't feel you right now. And I feel all these feelings and emotions pulling me 100 different ways. But the one thing we're not doing is the only thing he asked us to do. And that's why it's number 2 on the list. Just being obedient. There was an occasion at the McHenry Fest this year where the spirit was really, really bad. Like, there was definitely something that God was purging from us as a group during that season. I mean, I think he's always purging something from us as a group, but there was something in particular that I don't know if as a group it was a shining moment for us. There was just a lot of being lost in your world kind of stuff going on like a lot of different fronts. Like it really wasn't like a shining moment for us, but the spirit was really, really bad. And I remember this moment where it was like starting to get to that place where it's like overwhelming, you know, like the spirit was just so horrific. And I remember there was one thing I knew that the Lord wanted me to do. And that was my whole, stability through the whole event. It was just, okay, the spirit's really bad, but there's one thing. There's one thing I know that Jesus is asking me to focus on. And it was like having, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like having just this like foundation to just grab a hold of so something doesn't take you away. It was just, Lord, I don't want to be moved. I don't want to get off center. I don't want to allow things to affect my thinking or ways of looking at things. So like, what do I have? And I think you'll find every single time there's one thing, and it could be really, really simple, one thing that he's asking you to do. And give yourself over to it. Dayton?
I just want to what you're talking about. There was a moment a couple months ago that the Lord brought something to my attention of something to like contend for. And I did that for a little bit until it was no longer like a pressing issue. And like how you were sharing earlier, like I took over again. And it came back up again. And like just last week, and I was talking to Phil, and Phil was kind of telling me like, I think it's important that you really contend for this and give your all for this thing. And it was the exact same thing from a couple months ago. And so that was like, I was like, all right, this is my charge. You know, like clearly this is important and this is something that I need to focus on. And he was sharing like, it would be good that you at least think about this and put time towards it every day. And so I'm like, all right. And so it's interesting how you were saying like, you know, Lord, help me with this, or help me with that. And it was like, you know what? All I know right now is that this is the big thing right now.
It's just that one thing.
So I'm just going to cling to this. I'm going to go all out on this. And so that's what I've been doing every day is this thing. And it's been interesting because like I've actually felt like the closest I've been to God in a while by focusing on this one thing. And it's not like directly like being in union with Jesus kind of thing, but because I know that this is the marching order that I have right now, I think it's putting me in a place where I'm close with God because it's what's on his mind. And so I just want to give credit to what you're saying, that
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing this week is this one thing. And it's been helping my spiritual and just like changing like my thought life has been a
Right.
little bit more heavenly and stuff like that than it has been because I'm focusing on contending for this thing.
Yeah. Good. Barry?
I just wanted to concur too, because you told me to do something that I sort of let go to the wayside, and now, like, there's an infusion of doing it and having joy at the end of it. You know, like I did it again, and I'll do it again. Let's see how many more times we can do it. So, in any event, I just that sort of holds that allows me to hold on to something that I just feel is cutting through the mass of, you know, a lot of times you say, well, what should I do, Lord, blah 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 blah, but it's staying honest with and transparent with the very thing, the one thing that is usually not a mountain to climb that he's asking of you.
Yeah.
Amen.
It's where we spend so much time focusing on all the things we think are going to make the storm go away,
Right.
rather than doing the one thing that he's actually asking us to do. Yeah. Any other comments about that before we move on? Okay, and you know what the third one is? Be humble. Just be humble. It's really, really helpful when you can get to that place where you see people as better than yourself. You stop judging what everybody else should and shouldn't be doing. And instead, you just start recognizing the ways that maybe you're falling short, working on those things. It's really strange. Sometimes I really like the feeling of when something stings. You know, like when you find, it is at first, but when it stings, it tells me that I'm humble. Or maybe I'm being humbled. It's the process of getting there. And again, we spend so much time trying to make the storm go away. And we don't realize that you need the storm so you can get to a place of rest. And in order for the storm to get you to a place of rest, you need to be vulnerable. You need to obey. And you need to be humble. When you can check all those boxes, I promise you, you will get to that place of rest and peace. But it requires like getting to the other side. And it is a big delusion to think I just need all my problems to go away. And it's like a dream. I mean, tell me that there isn't something that's really exciting about being the kind of person who could just click into the roller coaster and just go. Lord, take me where you're going to take me. Do what you're going to do. I don't have to be afraid of what's going to happen or how it's going to happen or how people are going to treat me or not treat me, because you've been bringing me through a ride that is purging all these self-empowering things from me so I can stop freaking out. I mean, it's so easy to just read the story and say, okay, now I've gone through the story. Can I just sit in the boat and be at rest now? Can you be in that place where it looks like your life is on the line? Probably not yet. I don't think so. I mean, I'll find out, I guess. It's kind of what you were saying earlier, like, how are we going to embrace that if life is really on the line? But I think these are a couple things that I don't know have really been helpful. Like I've been focusing on, and there's some of these things that I've been able to endure an awful lot spiritually because of. To be able to stay centered, like in the face of something that is really, really challenging. Be vulnerable. Obey. Do that one thing. Might be a couple things. Just like Dayton said, like, give yourself over to it. I mean, that was one of the things that, I don't know, just really saved me from getting my vision tainted. It was just, there's some real bad stuff going on, but this is what my marching orders are. And that's it. So I'm just going to make sure I do a good job. It could be something really simple. It was for me. Could be just, right now your marching orders is empty the garbages. And you feel like you want to argue and be frustrated with everybody and take everything personal and figure everything out in your day tomorrow, and just empty the garbages. And give yourself over to it. And be humble. If you're having a hard time looking down on people, not seeing other people as greater than yourself, of not judging and thinking that you've arrived in your own estimation, well, look for a moment that stings, because that'll help get your feet back to the ground. Embrace it. Find that occasion that'll help bring you to that place of humility. And just like we've been talking about with storms, you don't need to avoid self-knowledge so you can feel good about yourself. You need to embrace self-knowledge so you can feel good about yourself. And that's pretty counterintuitive as well. So that's all I got. Any just final comments before we call it a night? Barry?
You know, I'm just thinking back to that scene in The Chosen. You know, Jesus addressed it to, you know, what's going on with you? And then Peter's yelling at him all the things that he's angry about. And then he says, then after he falls in the water, he says, hold on to me, and all the way back in the boat. And then what happens is then the Lord says, "Peace, be still," or whatever he says, or to calm the waters.
Right.
And that's really going to help me because I love that scene. I probably watch it once or twice a week. I love that whole scene, but I love how you put that apart.
All the steps are there, though.
Yeah, they are all clear.
He was judging everybody. He was judging Jesus. He was judging his circumstances. And what did he do? He put himself in a vulnerable position.
Right.
He obeyed. The Lord said, "Get out of the boat," and he did. He obeyed. And then he humbled himself. He said, "Lord, I'm so sorry."
I
And
like
then he
that.
found rest.
Pardon?
Then he found his rest.
Then he found his rest. I like that you said that vulnerability is the quick exit sign to getting off the highway of storm
Yeah.
or getting to that place of peace.
It's really scary to be vulnerable with another person. We're just terrified of it. You guys realize that? Why do you think it's so hard to be naked? You're just like totally exposed. We use clothes to protect ourselves with. We use pretensions and images we want to create, and we try and build ourselves up to be a certain kind of person and look a certain. We're just like terrified just to be vulnerable. And that's part of what's so beautiful about a Christian fellowship, when we can strip away all pretension and just be us. But it's easier said than done. It's really hard to be in a place, especially when you have people who are prophetic too, who just like everybody just sees right into your heart, and even in the midst of that, still fight as hard as you can sometimes to take them off the trail. To lead them to the wrong place, so they don't see the things inside of your heart that you already know is true. I don't do really well with vulnerability, but if we can get comfortable with it, the more you make yourself vulnerable, the more comfortable you get at being vulnerable, and the more you rest.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, even like how you say when you counsel, how was your day? I don't even want to answer that, because sometimes I feel just so starved for. My brother is human contact, but like for a conversation, and all I want to have is a conversation, and but I don't even know how to answer you, because I really don't know how I am. At least that's how I feel. I feel like that's me being vulnerable. But
Yeah, and most of the time our answer is, even our vulnerability is, these are my problems, and this is how they need to be fixed. Good counsel. Right? And we might not say that out loud, but we already know. And if you hear something that doesn't go along with how you've already decided this problem needs to be dealt with, a lot of times it's yeah, but you don't really understand. It wasn't like that. It's like,
that's all you said.
it's like, oh gosh, let's just go straight to vulnerability. The truth is, I don't have it figured out, and maybe I need a storm to realize that. And typically that's what we get when we stop realizing that. No, we don't have it figured out. We don't know what to do. We are completely lost without him. We are humble before him. We don't have it going on, and we don't have everybody else figured out either. We're just on a ride. And he's like just bent on being in union with us. Thank God. So he's going to bring us through what we got to get brought through so that we can step into paradise, be at rest here, and most definitely be at rest for eternity. And he's bent on it. Just go for the ride. Accept it. You guys, is it like settling in a little bit, like the image of that? I'm telling you, it's been so helpful. I'm just on a ride. I'm just going through something me and Jesus are doing together. And sometimes it's a really hard day. And sometimes it's an amazing day. I'm just on the ride. I'm not in charge. I don't even know what he's trying to fix. I don't know what he's purging. I don't know what he's helping me with. And I don't know how to get there. How could I know how to get there if I don't even know what the problem is to get there in the first place? So I'm just going to be humble about that, be vulnerable with those around me, and do the one thing he's asking me to do. It's like so simple. Isn't that a really simple way to... And it can be fun. Like I can't even tell you, like I've had days where I just felt absolutely overwhelmed spiritually, and it was a wonderful day. Isn't that weird? Really strange? So it's like, I'm just on the ride. It's what the day looks like today. So let's just be vulnerable. I'm going to obey. Be humble. He'll do the rest. Any other comments? Sylvia?
I think it's really cool what you're talking about, because I know it's just something that might seem small to some people, or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's he's in the right on my mind. But anyway, on Friday group, there was something I was struggling for the longest time, for like a month or so, and I brought it up to you guys as a group, and you told me, you said just ask Jesus to guide you, as to give you revelation on it. And I've been praying that way, and actually there's so much peace inside my heart now about it. But it took, even though it didn't seem like it was this big deal, but it was a big deal to me, and I just kept it inside for the longest time. We're just talking for that moment and saying it, and even then I was like, do I say it, do I not? Do I say it, do I not? And going back and forth, and finally I'm like, I heard God, just say it. And I'm like, okay. And
So you were vulnerable and you obeyed?
and
And then the result was it brought you to a place of peace?
Yeah.
Wow.
It really worked.
That's crazy.
So I just thought it was so cool.
Every time it's like that. Every time. It's very predictable.
Yeah. And it's really cool because, like, for the longest time I know everybody struggles with it, but I have a really intense time really, really being vulnerable. I don't know, probably the same for everybody. But even with my counselors, with you and Colleen and Phil, I've struggled. Like, I was the one that just went around the corner and said all these cool things and and never really hit the point. And I'm learning to just most recent, to really be able to say, hey, this is really what I'm feeling inside. And instead of just pretending or hiding or saying, oh, it's too late to call them, they're probably busy or asleep or whatever, but to really make it a point to listen to what God is saying for me to do. So, and be vulnerable and call my leadership.
It makes you feel so connected when you do that, doesn't it?
It really does. So I'm like really grateful that you spoke about this today. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Any other comments? All right, well, I'm going to close in prayer. Lord, please forgive us for our independence, thinking we got it figured out. Oftentimes making you the last one we reach out to. You're such a good God, and Lord, thank you for the storms in our life that are stripping away every self-empowering way that is keeping us from resting, truly resting in our soul. And Lord, I pray that right now you would fill everybody here with your comfort, with your rest, with your stillness. And we can just stand naked before you right now. We really need you. We need you in our lives. We need your guidance. We need your help. And we want to enjoy the process. Go along for the ride. And embrace what you're doing in our lives right now. Recognize your goodness, all the blessings that you constantly lavish us with. And to cling to you when it gets hard. As our first love is the first thing we reach out to, first one that we're vulnerable with. Lord, I pray that you'd strengthen everybody here. Would you expose every unclean thing? Draw us closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen.